And Dan does. My name is David Peña. I'm an American English teacher, now located in Mexico. And today I have a special guest, an amazing podcast developer, Dan LeFebvre from Based on a True Story podcast. So today we'll be hosting an interview. We'll be learning, what he does, what goes behind making a podcast, and all the interesting facts that go beyond the research and the things he does. So Dan, welcome to the event. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm a big fan of your show, and if you would like to introduce yourself to us, that'd be great. We can start there.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Gonna be a lot of fun. I always like talking about podcasts. So my show dives into the real history behind movies that that's based on a true story tagline that gets thrown into a lot of movies. Some movies are more accurate than others, but it's always fun and to learn a lot about the real history. I'm a big fan of history, big fan of movies, obviously. So it's a lot of fun to dive into the true story, find out what really happened.
Excellent, thank you. So my first question here for you is, could you tell us a little bit about what did you do before you became a podcast developer, and how did that probably led up to you now being the host that you are?
Yeah. So my background is actually in visual effects. So I worked very closely teaching in the movies and games industries, creating online courses for like Pixar and Blizzard and companies like that. So I was very familiar with the movie production process and big fan of movies that way. And then one of the roles that I had was content marketing. And so we started up a podcast. And in that podcast, that was my first show. We interviewed some of the artists behind movies and games and, how they created the movies and how they made games and things like that. And then as often happens with tech companies, there's mergers and acquisitions and things people get let go. And so I was let go from that position. And then I just wanted to do a podcast. I'd done that podcast for that company and really loved doing it. So I was trying to think how I could do a show that would just be for the fun of it. I didn't plan on this becoming, my full-time thing like it is now, but just doing it for the fun of it. And I was in the car coming back from Les Mis, the musical, and just looking up everything that had happened like in the French Revolution and trying to compare it with what I'd just seen in the musical. And that's kind of when it hit me. I was like, hey, if I'm doing this, maybe other people are doing it too. Maybe this can be an idea for a podcast. And that was kind of how it spiraled there.
Awesome. So how long have you been developing these episodes? I mean, we're going to say like from the very beginning of Based on a True Story. How long have you had this, channel ongoing?
Yeah, the first episode is April 2nd, 2016. So depending on what is today, August 7th. Yeah. So 2021. So it's been a few years. Time flies.
Yes. All right. Interesting. So, did you have any particular inspiration? I know that you mentioned the musical. Is there any other inspiration that came to you that made you say, "Hey, you know what? I think I can create a channel, on this topic"?
Yeah. So I guess there's two key things that kind of went into it. One, being the concept, and to be completely honest, there were other concepts that I came up with too. I knew I wanted to do a podcast. And it had to be about something that I was passionate about, because you'd be spending a lot of time digging into it and don't want to do something you're not passionate about. That'll come through. So there was that side of it. But then there was also, is this a concept that can work for a long period of time? Because there's a lot of different kinds of podcasts out there. Some of them are seasons and they change things up every season. And so I did a lot of research on just how podcasts are organized, how they're structured, and started to pull together some of the pieces from shows that I liked and be like, oh, I like how they're doing this here. I like how this show is doing this over here, and started to kind of piece it together to figure out something that would work for the concept that I had, but also with my schedule. Because when I first started the show, I was doing it evenings and weekends, just, outside of my regular full-time job. So that was really kind of how I started to formulate a lot of that. And to be honest, it has changed. So initially I knew that there would be a lot of stuff that I needed to do outside of creating the show itself, like building the website, building up social media, all that kind of stuff. And so I started off knowing that I would be doing this extra work on top of creating the actual episodes. Started off releasing every other week, knowing that eventually, once I got like the website built and all this kind of stuff, I would want to switch to a weekly release. And so I did that, went weekly for, gosh, I don't know, maybe a couple of years. And then there was a death in the family that I had to take a step back and take some time off. And then when I came back, just, things had changed. And so now I release, it usually averages about every other week or so still, but it's not quite on the weekly release schedule that I was previously. So I don't know if that answers your whole question. I kind of went off on a little tangent there.
But that's okay. Thank you. So, how do you select your movies? Is there any particular process that you take? For example, this movie, now I'm gonna research it and gonna see what is true and what is not. Like, how do you select the movies?
Yeah, I mean, listener requests is a big one. So if I have one request for a movie, it's probably not going to be as high a priority to get done as like Band of Brothers, like that. I don't even know how many requests I got to cover that series. So that's going to be higher up to try to get that done. I also try to spread out the genres. So like if I cover a World War II movie, I try not to cover like 4 or 5 World War II movies back to back. I'm going to throw in some biopics or some drama or different genres to try to spread it out a little bit, so it's not just the history behind World War II movies, because that could be an entire show by itself. There's enough of them out there. But those are the 2 key things.
All right, interesting. So yeah, I think you have definitely have many episodes, and I enjoy them all. I think I'll definitely look at maybe some movies that probably are not on the podcast, and if possible, I'll send you an email with them. So
I'm always open for more. Feel free to send in any requests you have. Can't guarantee I'll get to them right away, but for sure.
Sure, thank you. So, can you tell us about a particular episode that maybe you would say it's one of your favorite episodes? Just researching, and you can tell us about the movie and what went through your mind while researching this.
Yeah, one of my favorite ones would have to be The Imitation Game, because just big fan of the movie. The brief, if you haven't seen it, the brief concept of it is it covers the code breakers at Bletchley Park during World War II, breaking the German Enigma code. And it was I think it was episode number 3 that I covered. It was one of the very first ones that I knew I wanted to cover because I really loved the movie. And then just, I guess it was last year. I think it was just the beginning of last year. I had the chance to actually chat with the podcast producer that makes the official Bletchley Park podcast. So he got permission from Bletchley Park to come on the show to talk about the movie. But not only that, but he also went back and fact check episode number 3 that I did of originally, and that was a fun experience. It's kind of nerve-wracking to have somebody from Bletchley Park fact checking the 3rd episode that I made. But it was fascinating because when he was talking about it, he was like, well, there's, I don't remember the specific details. You can go listen to it. But there was one part that he pointed out where he's like, well, since that episode has been released, we've uncovered some new documents that have come to light and helped kind of shine a new light on some of this information. So it was fascinating to me that, I mean, that episode came out in 2016, and since then they've still had new information coming in. It's just, it just shows that, history it's always changing. We keep learning new things, and we keep uncovering new things, and that keeps me passionate about it, keeps it a lot of fun. But yeah, the Imitation Game, both episodes, because I got to go back and do some fact checking on it, but then also getting to chat with Mark Cotton, it's his name, about that.
Brilliant. And I mean, I've also noticed that you also have like, very talented guests, people who can really help you, describe the historical accuracies of really what went on, maybe what was true, what was, fiction, what was exaggerated, what was not. So how is it that you're also able to have these, amazing guests on your show? I mean, are they like physically there, or is this like, maybe through Zoom or something like that?
No, it's all remote. So I use a service called Squadcast, which is very similar to Zoom, but it's targeted towards podcasters, so the audio quality is better. But yeah, usually the basic process for how I figure out the guest and how get them on the show is figure out the movie that I want to cover, and then it's who is the best person to talk about the history of this. For some of them, it would be the actual, historical consultant that worked on the movie, like talking to John Neal Phillips about The Highwaymen, the Netflix movie about the men that brought down Bonnie and Clyde. So he was the historical consultant on the movie, and so getting to talk to him about not only the history, but also some of the behind the scenes on set and what that was like and stuff like that. For others, if it's not somebody that actually worked on the movie, but maybe it's a historian or an expert that has written the definitive biography on a person or something like that. I try to find someone who I think will be the best fit, and sometimes it takes a while to get them on. Anywhere from 6 to 7 months of back and forth and trying to coordinate schedules. Sometimes I've always got dozens and dozens juggling, essentially trying to get them on. Sometimes it's real fast. I'll find their contact information and reach out, and they're like, yeah, let's do it next week. And so I have to then scramble and start to put together the research on my side to prep for that sort of interview. Yeah, there's a lot of it is just kind of boils down to organizing schedules. And, once you find the person that I think would be the right fit, it's going to their schedule. I try to work around their schedule and to find a time that will work to make it happen.
All right. And, let's say you select a particular movie, Hollywood says it's based on a true story or, inspired by true events. We can definitely say that when a movie is, labeled as inspired by true events, it typically has more fictional elements than that of a story labeled as based on a true story. Although, however, I'm very sure, people like you who research can probably, have a better opinion on this. But, sometimes there's like, sometimes Hollywood just does so much fiction that whether it's inspired or based on a true story, it's like the same thing at the end of the day. They have like the same percentage of fiction. But, having that aside, let's say, you select a movie, it's based on a true story. So how do you begin to elaborate on your research here? How do you conduct that? How does it look like?
There's two basic ways, because I have two types of episodes. So as you alluded to earlier, some episodes I have guests on where I interview them, and so my research is going to be different when I'm interviewing somebody as opposed to if I'm doing all the research myself. For either of those, the first step, of course, is to watch the movie, and it takes a long time for me to do that. 2-hour movie, it'll probably take me like 7 or 8 hours to watch, because I'm pausing and taking notes and jotting things down. I end up with, sometimes hundreds of pages worth of notes in Word, of things that I've done in the movie. And then from there, I break it down to try to find the key plot points in the movie, kind of progressing with the movie's timeline. So my either line of questions or the end of the episode ends up kind of following the movie's timeline and some of those key plot points. And then it's going back to my notes as I was watching the movie and asking the questions around there. So as I was watching it, I'll be like, oh, is that person actually real? Or, pause the movie and you can see the name of a building or something. Oh, is that actually a real building? Does that mean where are they located? And is that in that time period and that kind of stuff? Starting to look some of those questions up. And then if it is an interview, I actually try not to do as much research into the true story if I'm doing an interview, because I try to come at it from, I watched this movie and this is what this is the only thing I know about history from this movie. And so that way I can ask questions from that perspective, which I try to make it kind of more along the lines of, I'm the viewer that has watched something and I don't know the real history. So I'm asking those questions on behalf of the viewer. If it is an episode where I'm doing all the research, it involves a lot of reading. I make use of audiobooks a lot and taking notes. So we can get into the details of that. Essentially, as I'm listening to the audiobook, if I notice a part that is something from my notes that I took for the movie, I'll add bookmarks to that in Audible. And then afterwards, as I'm actually starting to write the episode, I can go through and look at the bookmarks and see where things were mentioned in different books associated with things in the movie. And then it's kind of going back and writing it all and, doing double checks, and kind of goes back down to the copywriting at that point.
All right. And if I'm not mistaken, approximately, you mentioned that this might take between 32 to 36 hours of constant research, if we were to sum it up. Is that correct?
It varies depending on the movie.
Okay.
Yeah, it varies. Yeah, for a single episode, it probably averages about that, 30 to 40 hours. If it's an interview episode, most of that time is actually on the editing side, because editing audio for multiple people is more time consuming. If it's an episode that is just me, a solo episode, then most of that time is going to be in the writing and research, because I write it in such a way that I write it kind of how I talk. So that way when I record it, it sounds more like I'm just talking. And I also do a lot of self-editing in the recording process for that, because when it's just me recording, I can stop and go, I need to say that or say that over again. And so it's a lot less time actually editing the audio for a solo episode.
Yes, definitely. I'm just an amateur audio editor myself. I really can't call myself professional, but whenever I do need to edit audio, I'm familiar with the tools. But definitely you're doing this in a broader way. So if I take my time, editing audio, I can just imagine yourself for 50 minutes, 56 minutes, 1 hour. So it's complex, definitely. So my next question is, in one of your episodes, you mentioned that when you were a child, you and your family would have this habit of getting together. If I'm not mistaken, probably after dinner, and just build puzzles together. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And building puzzles is something that my family has also done, and I just think that it's good exercise. And cognitively speaking, I think building puzzles is something that really helps people with memory, with all of their creative abilities. So did that impact you in any particular way? Is there any special memory you have from this?
That was a Christmas tradition that we had. Once a year, we would get a big. We do things like after dinner and stuff like that too. But yeah, that in particular was more of a Christmas tradition. That was after opening the presents, then we start the puzzle and spend time doing that, and it would get increasingly more complex. The reason I mentioned it on the podcast actually was because there was a sponsor for the show that was doing puzzles, and so a lot of podcast sponsors like you to draw from your own personal experience, using their products and stuff like that. And I make sure that any sponsors are ones that I would actually want to support, not necessarily ones that are not relevant to me or not relevant to my audience. And so that was the reason I told that story on there, was for that sponsor.
All right. Thank you. My next question is, do you recall any particular episode where after you finished the research and even editing the episode, you went like, wait a minute, this movie was so off the tracks. I mean, this shouldn't even be labeled based on a true story because it's only like 15% accurate. Just say, was there any occasion, any episode where you were like, what happened here?
Yeah, but sometimes those are the more fun ones to talk about. Probably one of the biggest, most egregious examples of that would be, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Black Dahlia, about the Black Dahlia murder.
Yeah, I think I remembered it when it came out.
Yeah, that movie is complete fiction. Like they very briefly show the crime, and then it just goes off onto this completely made up story about these other people and a possible theory about what may have happened and all that. So for that episode, it was a while ago, so I don't remember the specifics of how I did it, but it was kind of like, well, from here on out, everything is fiction. So let's just tell the real story of what actually happened that they just avoided. Another kind of example would be The Perfect Storm, which is pretty accurate up until their boat leaves, because unfortunately with that tragedy, nobody survived. And so how do we know what actually happened? I mean, there are some things that we know from, signals and things like that are sent. And so I was able to look up some of that stuff and, historical records and such and do that. But for a lot of the dialogue that we see and a lot of the things that are going on the boat that we actually see in the movie, I had to be like, well, I mean, spoiler alert, they don't survive this. And so we don't know what actually happened. And so the rest of this is going to be pretty much fiction.
Yes, and speaking of which, The Perfect Storm was also one of the most iconic episodes I can really recall in my memory. Probably like one of the first episodes that I got introduced to when I saw your channel. So yes, as you mentioned, I guess there are moments where definitely we really don't know. I mean, it's almost impossible to really know what happened because all of the first eye witnesses or people who can testify are dead or whatever, and definitely there have to be some creative licenses have to take place.
Yeah, another example actually that just came to me, that's another way that this happens. I came across it with my very first episode, The Revenant, which is a story about survival, one man surviving unbelievable odds, which, if you believe Hugh Glass, the guy that the movie's based on, if you believe his story, then a lot of that is accurate. But he was the only one there. He was the only one surviving. And if you look into his history, he's a pretty good storyteller. He likes to tell stories about himself. And so you kind of have to maybe take a lot of it with a grain of salt and assume that, yeah, he survived. We know that he, disappeared at this location and then he just showed up at this fort, X amount of weeks later. But how much of that happened in between? He's the only person that was there. And so we just have to take him at his word. And so that's where a lot of that is going to be up for interpretation.
Right. And now going to we're going to see the other extreme. Has there been any episode where you actually said, "Hey, Hollywood did a great job here. I mean, this movie is really based on a true story. I mean, they really worked as best as they could to represent the facts and the historical accuracy of the events portrayed."
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite episodes that was based on an accurate movie would be Apollo 13. And one of the reasons why I think that's my favorite is because NASA just, they have all those transcripts. You can go read the text files, the actual transcripts, which is something that I spent hours doing in that episode, and you can compare it to the movie. And I mean, it's still a movie. It's still a movie. It's still entertainment. So no movie is 100% accurate. But we have the actual communication that happened with the men up in space and NASA, and being able to see those communications that happened, and see at different points, because they're all time stamped in there based on the mission time. It's really fascinating to have that level of detail to compare to, because we don't have that for everything. Not everybody tracks things as much as NASA does. So that was one that was a lot of fun to do. I probably spent a lot more time on that one, just because I found myself going off into these rabbit trails of just reading all their communications and all this stuff, and kind of nerding out on some of that tech side a little bit.
Great. And probably my last question for the moment before we head on to the attendees. Could you, just tell us, like, what is the best thing, yeah, what is the best part of being a podcaster? And what would you say could be probably a not so good part? Let's start, like, what's the best part of being a podcaster before jumping to the other one?
I I think it's different for everybody, but for me, it's the chance to do something that I'm passionate about, and earn a living off of it. But then getting to talk to some of the people that I've gotten to talk to. If it wasn't for my podcast, I wouldn't have a reason to talk to Lady Carnarvon, or talk to Paul Watursky about J. Edgar, and so it gives, I don't say an excuse, but it gives me an excuse to talk to some really amazing people, to learn about subjects that I'm passionate about, and learn about history, and without the podcast, I wouldn't be able to do that. So that's probably my favorite part. And I guess switching to the least favorite part, it'd be the time. It just takes a lot of time, and I guess this is another thing that's going to be different for everybody, because some podcasters, I know they record things live and then they publish it, and they don't really do any editing or anything, and they do that. But I don't think I could do it that. I don't think I could do it that way. Maybe I'm too much of a perfectionist or whatever. Not saying that everything in my show is perfect, but trying to cut out a lot of the audio issues, and cutting out the uhs and the ums. I purposely don't cut all of them out, because you have a natural conversation, you're going to have some in there. But if you were to listen to the raw audio versus what actually gets edited, there's pretty significant difference there, and that takes a lot of time to cut a lot of that stuff out.
Yes, definitely. I mean, working with the raw audio is something that, like you mentioned, if you are a perfectionist, I mean, you really have to zoom into every, audio wave there, and, eliminate what you don't want there. And I mean, it's not really super easy. I mean, it's not just like, click a button and everything is, organized in a magical, neatly way. No, I mean, there is definitely, background suppressing and whatever, and so forth. But, it doesn't do everything you want to, like, immediately. So
yeah, and I mean, there's the technical side of that too, but there's also a lot of time that goes into making the guest sound the best that you can. And sometimes when you ask somebody a question, and I'm sure I've done it many times as you've asked questions, it takes a few seconds to process that. And so you want to start answering something, and you're like, oh, you know what? Actually, my answer was something else. Like when I remember The Revenant, right? And so if I were going back in there to edit that, sometimes I just cut out that first part because that wasn't really what their answer was. They were just saying the first thing that came to their head because they thought they needed an answer. And then there's, I remember actually what I was going to say. And it's this here. Just cut out that first part. So a lot of that I do partly, I guess, perfectionist, but also I like to think that it helps respect everybody's time. The listener's time is important as well. And so I don't like to leave a lot of that extra fluff stuff in there that's not really the answer. As I said, I do leave some stuff in there, some pauses, because sometimes people naturally pause in conversations. Sometimes people do say and so if I take everything out, it might seem a little unnatural, but trying to keep it that balance of a natural conversation versus removing all the unnecessary stuff to get to the meat of the episode.
Yes, I can definitely see, that we can definitely appreciate that in each of the episodes that you put out for us. So thank you so much. Okay, so any of the attendees, if you would like to ask Dan a question, so now is the time. Feel free to use the chat section, or you can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself. Let us know you have a question or a comment, and feel free to go for it. Just look at the chat. Okay. Anyone in particular? If not, I will continue. Okay, Diana.
Yeah.
And then Chris.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's very interesting and it's very amazing. Thank you for your time. I just wanted to ask, how long do you last working when you are editing all those podcasts? When you said that you fix the voice and all of those things, like how long do you last editing those things?
Like how long does it take, or how long is the raw versus the edited?
Oh, how long do you take to do it?
Honestly, everyone is different because some people are get right to the point, and some people go on and on and on. So in the actual raw, I let them go on and on and on and say what they need to say. And then because I know I can always go back in there and cut a lot of that out if I need to. It varies, but if I would try to give an average to it, maybe 10 to 15 hours roughly might be kind of an average for an interview. If it's an episode that is just me, a solo episode. As I mentioned earlier, I do a lot of self-editing in the recording process, and so that'll only take a couple hours to edit.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice, thank you. Chris, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I have 2.5 questions. So first of all, thank you for the interview. Now I have got a new fountain of podcasts. Then, did you ever run into troubles because the film producer didn't like your point of view or your research?
That's a good question.
No, I haven't. No, I haven't come across that. I've had a lot of people that will point out the mistakes or point out that this isn't actually what happened, or this person's name was actually spelled slightly differently or something. And then kind of a lot of that stuff happens on YouTube. There's a lot of you can comment directly on there, and it's kind of funny because a lot of times other people will reply and be like, no, actually you're wrong, this over here is what happened. And so it starts this dialogue, which I mean, one of the purposes behind the show that I like about it is it allows me to shine a light on the actual history and some of the people, like the authors and their work, they spend years and years and years researching one particular subject that I spend 30 or 40 hours on, but that's not nearly the amount of time that other people spend on it. So being able to shine a light on them and start some of that dialogue of what actually happened, I think that's a good thing.
Okay. And would you say if there is a difference of Hollywood productions or European, African, Asian productions, if some, for example, if European productions are more precise about the information they give, and for example, Hollywood productions are more storytelling, or is it only a thing which producent it is and how they work with the effects?
That's a good question, and to be honest, I haven't really thought of it that way. Where it's being produced to determine the accuracy. I think, just I guess off the top of my head, I would think, at the end of the day, it's a movie, and movies have to make money. Some of the historical consultants that I've talked to, they explain it really well, and there's been multiples that I've talked to, like Gordon Lacko, and that have kind of explained it as their job on the role as a historical consultant is to tell the director what actually happened in this moment, and then the director decides, I'm going to take creative license and I'm going to deviate from that for the story, for that purpose, or I'm not. I'm going to follow along because that follows the storyline. I think end of the day, no matter where the movie's made, it's still a movie and it's still going to be entertainment. And so I don't know that I've ever actually looked into location where something is made, determining the accuracy as much.
Okay, and with all the time you spent with this podcast, and I think you discovered many new producers, perhaps new countries which are good in making films. Did you fall in love with a special country or a special producer? So that you are, when you know there's some film they are just making that you are really curious about it. That yes.
That's a tough one. I mean, I've found a lot of movies that I probably would never have watched if it wasn't for the show. I mean, the first one that kind of comes ahead would be Rabbit Proof Fence, which is an amazing story about 3 young girls in Australia who get taken away from their families and then manage to walk all the way back, massive distance. And it's an amazing story, but I don't know that I could say that it's one of those things that I fall in love with every single episode that I do. And so it's like the episode that I'm working on right now is the one that I'm in love with. And then I have to move on to the next one. And that's the one that I'm going to move on to. So I don't know if I have an answer to that one, that, there's one that I've just fallen in love with and just want to, I don't know. That's a very good question. I've never thought of that one.
Yeah, a year ago, perhaps I found a station. They show Spanish films from Europe, and before that I wasn't really aware of Spanish films, and they make really films I like.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many great movies out there. That was talking a little bit earlier about starting the show and making sure that it would be a show that could last. One of the first things that I did when I had this concept was I sat down and actually started researching how many movies there were that were based on a true story, because I had never actually sat down to do that. And I realized there's a lot of them, and I could be doing this the rest of my life, and they still keep making more. I'm never going to get through them all.
It will never end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Juan Carlos, you have your hand up. Go ahead. What is your question?
Yeah. Hi, I am Juan Carlos LeFebvre, and I have a question. It is when you start making podcasts, what was for you the most difficult thing to make them?
The most difficult thing for me probably was it's probably the concept side and coming up with that, kind of figuring out that process before I even recorded anything. I talked briefly about that earlier, but my background being in visual effects, I'm very, very comfortable with computers. I've been around computers my whole life. So that side of it, the technical side of it, was not very challenging for me, fortunately. So I was able to focus more on the content. And that's honestly something, if you listen to episode number 1, then you listen to my most recent one, the show has changed a lot over the years. And a lot of that is as I'm learning new concepts or learning new things, or even just want to try new things out. Like David, you mentioned 2 truths and a lie earlier. That's not, I don't think I did that until maybe the 2nd or 3rd year. And that was something I was like, this sounds like a fun idea. I had seen it somewhere else. I certainly didn't come up with that concept. You can find 2 truths and a lie everywhere, but I thought it would be a fun concept to give a listener the ability to have something to try to look out for in the episode, like where, trying to find different facts throughout the episode. And then I almost cut it. I was like, this isn't really doing anything. And then I got some listener feedback. It's like, Matt, that's my favorite part of the show. It's like, okay, well then I guess I'll keep it in. So yeah, the content, coming up with content and trying to hone that. And that's another thing. It's an ongoing thing. 5 years from now, the show will probably be very different than it is right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else have a question? All right. Maybe not. All right. So, how can we support your channel? Or your podcast channel, sir? Is there a particular way that we can support your channel? Sharing it with a friend or something in particular?
Sharing with a friend is great. Always appreciate that. You can always find all the episodes at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. And my recommendation, anytime somebody's like, oh, what's the first one that I should listen to? Is find a movie that you like, because you're probably not going to like all the movies. Nobody likes every movie. But that's just the way it is. Find a movie that you like and learn the real history behind it.
Great. So thank you so much. I mean, so something that I personally do, I don't know, I'm guessing I'm not definitely the only one. There are people who do also do this, but like in my particular case, as soon as I finish watching a movie that is labeled, based on a true story or based on, true events or whatever, like I just normally just go and, type in Google, like whatever the name of the movie is, like, fact versus fiction, or, Hollywood versus true facts. And it's really interesting. Some of the websites also, have a contrast, and they tell you, well, this is what happened in the movie, this is what happened in real life, this is what happened here. So, that's also how I came across your channel, and I've been a big fan ever since. So thank you again, Mr. Dan, for being here. I really appreciate reaching out to you. You were kind enough to also accept the invitation to be here. As I said before, I'm a big fan. Will continue to be a big fan. I've actually shared your channel with some of my English students, specifically those who are more intermediate, because not with the beginners, but definitely if you're an intermediate or advanced English student, his channel is one of them I would highly recommend for multiple reasons. But as a language teacher, it's just my recommendation. And once again, thank you so much for being with us here today. I greatly appreciate you coming in, sharing your story, sharing your passion with us about making, how you go about making these episodes. And I hope we can see each other again soon. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, and thank you to all attendees who stayed with us until the end. I appreciate you. Great questions, guys. I really enjoyed seeing you, and I hope you continue with your language learning, practicing, being bilingual, every day. So, thank you so much for coming, and as always, keep learning, keep practicing, and stay safe, guys. Thank you so much.
I think maybe Chris had a question.
Oh, yes.
Or Andreas.
Oh no, it was just plus signs.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you for pointing out. Thank you. So thank you so much, guys. Okay. Have a happy Saturday, or wherever you are, and hope to see you again next week. Bye, everyone.
Okay,
thank you so much,
thank
Dan.
you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.